So it seems that the Outriders have got their devastating charge back that they're famed for. Let's talk about their new and souped up melee profile and how the unit's looking in game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd do a unit review for the Outriders, revisiting them with their bigger and badder profile. Let's talk briefly about the models and their lore, look through their datasheet bit by bit, then talk about all their buffs, synergy, characters and support options in Codex Space Marines and beyond. Model-wise, the Outriders are basically the successor to the very long-standing Space Marine bike kit. Models coming from around about the turn of the millennium, I believe. They went unupdated for a surprisingly long time, kind of similar to how the Chaos Bikers have for a while, and then got reinterpreted for the launch of 9th edition in the Indomitors box set, where they featured fighting the Necrons. Within the chapter, they provide recon and fast assault tactics for Space Marines. They do pretty well to lay waste to enemy infantry formations with their hard-hitting and punchy assault tactics that the Astartes favour, and are particularly loved of course by the White Scars, basically being their Mongolian heavy cavalry of the grim darkness of the far future. Their model kit costs £40, €51 or $62, and that gets you 3 bikers. Their points per dollar is pretty dismal at only 1 point. Now that they're 80 points, I think that's partly just due to the fact that Games Workshop has to repeatedly make their points cost cheaper to try and make them relevant throughout 10th. It is funny that they started the edition at around 115 points and are now all the way down to 80 with a massive rules boost before they actually become a bit more relevant again. As the miniatures go, I feel like they're okay, but there's maybe a few more criticisms of them compared with some of the primaris kits. I feel like the miniatures look nice enough with big chunky Astartes bikes, more or less how you'd imagine. They don't really have a whole load of ground clearance, but look like they're going to get from A to B on sheer power alone. The kits maybe are a little bit simplistic though for Games Workshop charging that much for them. A few of them have had mould line issues, the two halves just not fitting together super well. I feel like maybe there was a little bit of disappointment that the original monopose ones were all we got. Having a kit with a special weapon and maybe a sergeant in it could have been a fun option as well. Not having that has also led to in-game consequences that they just tend to be a bit good against lighter infantry and not much more. In any case though, as ever, if you're looking to pick up some Space Marines, Outriders or otherwise, feel free to check out the discount retailers linked in the video description. They can always save a good amount of money versus Warhammer bought from Games Workshop, anywhere between 10 and 21% off depending on where you are around the world. Let's get into their stats though, and the Outriders are 80 points per 3 of them, or 160 per 6, and you can also add an ATV into the squad as well for an extra 60 points if you want to. They're a mounted biker unit with a 12-inch move, so they do move nicely fast, but it also means that they need to move around ruin walls and terrain pieces, which does mean in practical games of Warhammer 40k, it can make them significantly slower than say jump intercessors that go the same speed but can go straight through ruin walls, or at least if you're trying to advance on your opponent a bit more carefully and trying to take some cover and hide from line of sight as you move up. Their big bases with the pivot rules often mean that they might want to kind of drift from place to place, keeping a locked orientation, otherwise they'll be paying a 2-inch move penalty. The bikers each have OC2, which I don't think is too bad on that front. 80 points for 6 objective control is alright for fast moving skirmish things, and otherwise for keywords they do have the grenade one as well. That can be handy enough to help with targets that they'd otherwise struggle with, if it's going to make a big difference on an isolated fight. Durability wise, I'd say that's one of the strong suits of the Outriders. They're effectively around 27 points per model for 4 wounds at toughness 5 with a 3+ save. I think that's generally impressive enough, particularly for a fast moving unit. I think it's at least fairly helpful for a fast moving objective grabber type thing to absorb a fair bit of fire as well, as it means the opponent's not just going to be able to easily deal with them with their own equivalents, and they're probably going to be at least fairly low priority compared with your mainline damage dealers. Only being toughness 5, no invulnerable save, and a lot of wounds per model though, basically special weapons and anti-tank fire will both be pretty happy shooting at them, and most damage 2 power weapons will take them down in short order, so while they'll soak up a bit of damage, the majority of dedicated damage dealers won't be struggling too hard to remove a squad of 3 of them. When shooting, they have the option of heavy bolt pistols if they're locked in combat, though most of the time they're going to be firing with their twin bolt rifles. Each Outrider gets 2 shots out to 24 inches, at strength 4 AP1, damage 1 with twin links. It's not really going to be the biggest deal in the world, but could chip a few wounds off an infantry unit or 2. If they're charging in against a big squad, it could be kind of meaningful. A squad of 3 of them kill around 3 extra termagants. They only do around about say 1 or 2 extra wounds to standard Space Marines out of cover. It could be handy enough though just to put a wound or 2 on something at range, particularly if there was a unit that was heavily depleted. Particularly after the balance update, it's their melee damage that's the standout thing though. Previously this wasn't so very different from their range damage. The Astartes chainswords with 4 attacks at strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1. Basically good against light infantry, but not even being particularly threatening to standard sized Space Marines. Now though, they've basically got the same sort of special rule as the Thunderwolf Cavalry have. Their Thunderous Impact rule replaced their Auto Advance 6 rule, and now if they make a charge move this turn, you get to improve the strength and damage of their melee weapons by 1. That means that those Outriders are going to be hitting at strength 5, AP 1, damage 2, 12 attacks for a unit of 3 of them, which I think as it goes is pretty good stuff for 80 points, particularly if you're a unit that's at least somewhat fast, somewhat tough, and can do at least a little bit of damage at range as well. In terms of actually doing damage though, it does mean that they really want to be the ones doing the charging and not the other way around ideally. Otherwise they're just not going to hit very hard at all, besides against light infantry. It means they could get on well as well with detachments that allow them to fall back and charge passively. For their damage output, it depends a lot against the targets, but against standard Horde models they haven't actually improved at all I guess. You kill around about 4 or 5 termagants on the charge, though you could chip a few more away with bolt rifles as mentioned. They're way better against standard Space Marines though, killing 2 or 3 of them on average. They're still going to come up kind of short against tougher things. You average 1.3 failed saves against Terminators or Rhino on average, so you're not going to be doing any sort of wonders to those kind of units, and there's a good chance you might well just get unlucky and do nothing. If you did want to focus on their damage output, you could just double those numbers obviously if you increase the squad size to 6, though I feel like for their intended role they're a bit more likely to go for smaller units of 3 of them. Finally, for their units options, they've got the chance to take an ATV for 60 points if they'd like to, though this one's been a very rarely taken option in 10th edition so far. For the extra point investment, you get 8 wounds at toughness 5, he gets a twin bolt rifle as well, and then either a multi-melter or an onslaught Gatling cannon to back that up. Both of those are usable enough, though I think most people would take the multi-melter. The squad's likely to be getting fairly close, and it helps out against the sort of things that the bolt rifles and their melee will struggle against. For changing the way the unit works, you basically make the squad worse in melee per point, given that he gets no AP and less attacks than 2 bikers. Slightly worse in defense per point, even if you had a bunch more wounds into the unit, that will skew them to be a slightly more shooter unit with the multi-melter. Personally, I think at 60 points I wouldn't really be jumping to add it in. It just doesn't really gel super well with their intended role. It maybe could be okay in perhaps a biker synergy detachment with some sort of leader or enhancement attached, maybe Stormlance or company of hunters with a biker chaplain. It feels like he's only really going to be worth it if he's getting more value out of characters or stratagems. Talking of which, for support for the unit, like the rest of the Space Marines, it can always make use of Oath of Moment, reroll hit rolls for plus a third worth of damage there. Kind of fun that could be adding a +1 to wound now, which I guess would make them a bit more threatening against mid-toughness stuff, though I feel like unless you're going down a very bike-heavy route, you're probably going to have other things to be your more mainline damage dealers that are going to make better use of Oath. Again, I feel like it's the same for stratagems. If you're using them in a small unit role for 80 points, perhaps occasionally Armour of Contempt could be worth it if all that matters is them surviving on a mid-board objective and scoring that point, though I think most of the time they're a bit small to be bothering with. Or you could maybe use grenades to add a bunch of damage and maybe tip a close combat, as they are likely to be able to move up fast enough to be able to get in range for that. In general though, unless making them a big central unit, it feels like it's going to be better to go light on the stratagems. Talking of which though, with a big melee buff, the Chaplain on bike could be a bit more relevant, and definitely could be a fun option if you're trying to make a White Scars theme work. He's 75 points, so not the most expensive character in the world, so that'd be 235 points for a squad of 6 Outriders, or maybe up to 300 with an ATV. He gets a 5 wound stat line with a 4+ invulnerable save, and he chips in with some slightly heavier melee, strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2, all hitting on a 2+. And that melee can also make use of the squad special rule as well, so it'd be strength 7 and damage 3 on the charge, which is fairly punchy and good against 3 wound units. For his buffs though, he gives 2 quite nice ones, a +1 to the wound roll in melee, and at range he grants devastating wounds against one unit within 12 inches, which actually does make their bolters into a somewhat scary threat, given that they're twin linked you can re-roll the wound roll for them, so there's at least a reasonable chance that you get a 6 or 2 and do a couple of mortal wounds. They're both pretty nice buffs at trying to skew the unit into a more danger one as opposed to a fast tanky one. Though I still feel like maybe the overall effect for a squad of 6 of them at 235 points is maybe a touch on the underwhelming side for the investment if there's not something else going on. They should handle things like standard size Space Marines incredibly well with that, but anything that's toughness 10 or higher they're still going to have a hard time against, and also anything with a 2+ save due to all their attacks being AP 1. He does seem interesting though, and that entire combo is massively better than it used to be. Now they get so much better attacks on the charge. Otherwise for the core codex, probably just worth mentioning Kosaro Khan as well. If he's in the army, then he can grant +1 objective control to Outriders. It is kind of fun as a reward if you're playing fluffy white scars, I guess, though I still feel like it's going to have trouble, say, compared with Raven Wing, where you get quite a lot more support options and mounted stratagems. Moving on to detachments, and the most obvious one for the codex is the Stormlance task force. This one's the one that just generally hasn't really worked too well in any sort of competitive setting, largely aside from Space Wolf players using it for their Thunderwolves. Outriders being better definitely makes it a lot more viable, though it's still maybe in the slightly awkward situation where the Outriders absolutely needs to carry basically the entire army if you're taking that detachment, just due to a lot of the other supporting rules not working on anything else but mounted, and Space Marines not having any sort of biker elites intrinsically in the core codex. It definitely has a lot of things to make Outriders scarier though if you're trying to build around them. You get advance and charge and fall back and charge, and that second bit is definitely nice with the +1 strength and damage. Fury of the Storm is pretty great for a chaplain biker with a big damage increase, and Hunter's Instincts could do early arrival from reserve. Most of the stratagems are good enough as well. Lance melee, auto advancing 8 inches and then charging, -1 to hit and wound at range, and the reactive move at 6 inches. Again, it maybe feels like the main issue is that the Outrider squads are still going to struggle to take down enemy heavies in the same way as, say, Thunderwolves might. I think it would help them a lot if they just had some way or a different character to put some scary power fists or lethal hits in the unit. Otherwise, for the core codex, the Gladius could be a useful one. All the doctrines are pretty relevant to them, including the fallback and charge, and they have access to a lance melee stratagem that can gain some extra AP as well in Assault Doctrine, and that could make them genuinely quite fearsome on the charge. Even for a unit of 3 of them, that AP will be great against, say, enemy Space Marines. Beyond that, most of the other detachments have smaller things: Firestorm for Strength 5 bolters up close, Ironstorm for its rerolls, Vanguard Spearhead for stealth and cover, but in these ones they feel a bit more de-emphasised, and I guess you just take them for skirmishing objectives and things. Despite the Space Marine update seeming to try and improve the lot for the core codex, I feel like actually really quite a lot of the Divergent Chapters could get on well with Outriders. They'll like the glow up to the Raven Wing company of Hunters. They get to advance, fall back, shoot and charge, which just means they're basically just dealing max damage all the time. Really quite nice for a skirmisher unit on the flanks. They get to repeatedly shoot their bolters and trigger that charge bonus if the enemy can't kill them, and that feels like it could help them win some one-on-one fights. Outriders a battle line there in case you want loads, and they also have access to a -1 to hit stratagem and a return to reserve one, both of which could be handy enough. You could also lead the entire unit with a Raven Wing command squad as well, which gets them a bunch of benefits, though I think you'd be competing with Black Knights for that. I still probably guess that the Black Knights would be the way that most people would go with their scary plasma guns and now devastating wound melee, and maybe the Outriders would still be the sort of supporting objective grabbing type ones, while the Black Knights are the main damage dealers. I guess the biker leaders, including the champion, will get the boosted damage though on the charge, which could be a selling point. Otherwise, for the Dark Angels, they could also be interesting in that new Lion's Blade one for Grotmus. There's now a bit more incentive for them to be charging in, and they could help to deliver the Deathwing and then provide a bunch of volume damage to attacks as they do so. Otherwise, for the rest, there's a fair bit of interesting stuff too though. Liberator Assault Group for the Blood Angels has them hitting at 5 attacks at Strength 7, AP 1 and Damage 2. 15 attacks total for 80 points, which seems reasonable enough. They will definitely still be competing against Jump Intercessors there with their Power Fist and their Volume Chainswords though. Otherwise, I think they're also interesting for Space Wolves and Black Templars too. Space Wolves perhaps seem to be in a particularly good place to make use of them if they want to, given that they already use the Stormlance competitively for their Thunderwolves. Feels like you could probably find room for a unit or two of Outriders that could perhaps press forward, take objectives and maybe deal with smaller units that aren't worthy of a big Thunderwolf charge. Otherwise though, for their Champions of Russ and the Black Templars Righteous Crusaders, they could both get Feel No Pain there, making them tougher, and they both have stratagems for extra AP and melee as well, which they quite enjoy. The Templars could do some sort of crazy big combo with a Bike Chaplain with a 5+ Feel No Pain from Tannhauser's Bones, though admittedly that's probably still better on something else like Assault Terminators or Crusader squads. Finally, for the Death Watch, they're probably a bit niche there, though I feel like the Bike Chaplain in particular would really enjoy the +1 strength, AP and damage via Thief of Secrets if you did want to try and make some Death Watch bikers work. Overall, I feel like the new version of Outriders are looking like a much more interesting unit than they were before. Previously, they were pretty niche in tournament lists, their objective skirmishing role often being done by things like Scouts if you wanted something to start in the midfield, or Jump Intercessors if you wanted some fast movers. They still seem to be the preferred option over the Outriders, even now they were more expensive between their jump packs, inbuilt deep strike and damage dealing. I think that'll still be the main contest for their battlefield role, as units to push out, skirmish with the enemy, and maybe do secondaries. The jump intercessors still basically move faster, given that they can move straight through terrain and not care about it, where the Outriders still have to go round. The jump intercessors have deep strike, which could make them better for dropping for secondaries, though now the jump intercessors don't really have quite as much an advantage on the damage dealing game. I still say they're a little bit ahead due to their mortal wound impact hits, but significantly less so against things like standard Space Marines, and the Outriders do have the advantage of both being quite a bit cheaper and also a bit more durable, plus having a little bit more firepower out to longer range. Overall for this role, I'd say that there's now still a few more arguments for both units, though I probably wouldn't say that the Outriders have gained so much that they're going to make jump intercessors irrelevant or anything. In any case, let me know what you make of their datasheet and their newly improved melee capacity down in the comments. Are you going to be putting a few more Space Marine bikers on the table, or are they still not going to make the cut? In any case, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more about this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and hopefully I'll aim to take a look at a few more of the Space Marine units that got big improvements in the update. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.